It is our privilege this morning to welcome Dr. Mayhill Fowler, Associate Professor of History at Stetson University and a widely respected scholar of Ukrainian history and culture. Dr. Fowler's work focuses on the lived experience of Ukraine, its people, its artists, its resilience, and the way ordinary life continues even in extraordinary times. A former Fulbright scholar to Ukraine, and an affiliated researcher with the Center for Urban History in Lviv, she brings not only academic expertise, but a deep personal connection to the country and its people. Please help me welcome Dr. Mayhill Fowler.
Thank you so much. I will just say I actually got promoted last year, so I'm a full professor of history. Thank you. I'll just say the first female professor to get promoted to full professor at Stetson University since 1883. So, yeah. I also just want to say I really thank you for the invitation. I'm actually extremely moved by the attention that you all are giving to Ukraine and the poems that you read so beautifully and the beautiful gift that your daughter bought you. Yes, there's a lot of designers on Etsy from Ukraine. It's been several years, actually, since I've seen a group of sort of non-Ukraine experts give that much attention to Ukraine. I really mean that. And so thank you so much for giving me some of your time and attention for this country. What I really want to ask is, what does it mean to care about Ukraine when war is no longer breaking news, but daily life? And just a quick note on some of these photos, this is a picture outside Kherson, which is a beautiful city in southern Ukraine, but this part of the area is currently under Russian occupation. So I was there in 2019, but now I'm sure it doesn't look like this. And this picture is of a beach near Ukraine on the Azov Sea. We went swimming in the beach. It was great. There were a few too many jellyfish for my taste, but it was really beautiful. This is also under Russian occupation, and they've mined the whole beach. It's gone. So I was last here actually at this podium in 2022, just a few months after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm here 4 years later, and I'm a different person. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I mean it really simply. The war has really changed my work and how I work. It's changed my friendships. I've lost some friendships. I've gained some friendships. My teaching, my sense of responsibility, and my understanding of care. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk about Ukraine not as a battlefield or a geopolitical problem, but about Ukraine as a place where people are just like us. And they're living and they're studying and they're teaching and they're parenting and they're making art and they're grieving and they're continuing. And I want us to think about what it means to care about a place and a people over time, when the emergency doesn't end, but when attention fades, and when care has to become more than just sympathy, right, or sort of feeling bad. A woman I know in Kiev wrote this winter about how the experience of being cold for so long had changed her. In case you don't know, Russia attacked major infrastructure in Kiev and kind of around Kiev this winter. And so most buildings had no water, no heat, no electricity in a very, very cold winter, one of the coldest they'd had in a long time. Some buildings had like 2 of the 3 or 1 of the 3, but most had none. And when it was over and spring kind of was finally coming, she wrote that she was a different person. And I was reading this from Florida. I mean, we had a hard winter, my plants died, but like it was nothing like that. I was reading this from safety. Of course, my experience is not hers at all, but I really recognize something in what she wrote, because I too barely remember what it felt to think about Ukraine before 2022. Um, these are sort of pre-full-scale invasion pictures. I'm outside our program in Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies at Stetson, wearing our signature T-shirt, which has a Firebird on it, which I would never wear anymore because it's such a symbol of Russia. I'm at the Me Strong, looking super happy. The full-scale invasion was like going to happen a couple of weeks later. And that's my best friend in Ukraine, Sophia. And this is summer 2021. So like the time before it all happened. So I'm not going to spend much time today predicting when the war will end. I have my ideas. But I think that question can sometimes make Ukraine sound like it's the main obstacle to peace, right? I mean, Ukrainians have already lost territory, homes, family members, schools, theaters, archives, universities, and whole cities. Ukraine has demonstrated willingness, including recently by a post by President Zelensky, to not only give up 20% of their territory, but also to come to the table realistically, right? They have made that clear that they are willing to come to the table. Russia has not. So the question is not what will Ukrainian compromise, like what will it take for Ukraine to compromise? The question is, what would it take for Russia to stop trying to destroy Ukraine, right? The question is about Russia. It's not about Ukraine. And I also want to be really careful about the word peace. It's a beautiful word. It is a perfect theme for this service. But in Ukraine, it's not abstract. And I think we really need to think about it, right? Peace cannot mean asking Ukrainians to accept occupation, deportation, torture, filtration camps, destroyed cities, or the disappearance of their language and institution, right? And just to be clear, wherever the front line is set, if there ever is a peace agreement, the people on the Russian side of that front line will lose a lot, right? There will be torture, there will be prisons, they will lose language, they will lose culture, they will never get those children back, right? We also have to understand that once there is a cessation of hostilities, that won't be peace. And there's a big difference that we talk about as historians between a cessation of hostilities, right? We're not firing at each other anymore. And what peace actually is. What is peace? Historically, post-wars are not peaceful. I'm actually deeply afraid of this post-war. I think it will be brutal and it will last our lifetimes. I've also become very cautious about the word resilience. Ukrainians are resilient. They really are. It's true. But I think we also have to realize what's behind that word. People are often resilient because they have no other choice, right? They're resilient because that's the only option. And so calling people resilient should not be a way of, admiring their endurance from afar while withholding the help that they need, right? Ukraine needs weapons. And we can't just say, oh, they're so resilient, right? We don't need to help them win this war. We actually do. So let me tell you about my personal journey through these past 4 years. In the first weeks of the full-scale invasion, I felt really lost. I am a professional historian of Ukraine. It is literally my job. I've been traveling there since 2006. Ukraine had given me friendships and archives, language, hospitality, colleagues, students, and a career studying Ukraine, literally my job. And suddenly I didn't know what to do. I couldn't fight, I can't repair electrical grids, I can't stop missiles. But over time, I realized that my front, right, was education. So first, teaching people outside Ukraine about Ukraine. So since 2022, let me go back here, you can see that. I've given a lot of talks to universities and community groups and book clubs and museums, scholarly audiences, and actually places like this. Some were Ukraine 101, like let me tell you about this country, it really exists. Some were about my work, so about theater and about gender and about culture. But all of them were really a part of the same work, right? Insisting that Ukraine is not just a country at war, but a complex society, right? With history and art and culture and theater and language and people. I think I've given over 50 talks at various places over the last 4 years, and you can see sort of some of them here, including you guys on the lower left. We also started here are just a couple more talks very quickly. I gave a talk on the Holodomor, which is the terror famine in Ukraine, in Los Angeles. For some reason, they picked me up there. Here I am giving a talk online to two of my students I'll talk about in a second, with my friend Sophia giving a talk at Princeton, and at our annual field conference. So just been sort of a lot more professional activity, which is sort of normal for people who study Ukraine. But we also started the Ukraine Initiative at Stetson. I don't know if you guys heard about it. The university gave support, a lot of financial support, to bring 4 undergraduates, and you see them here on the right, and 1 displaced scholar. You see her there standing with me on the left, to Stetson. Of the 4, 2, you can see them right there, Yana and Yulia, graduated 2 years ago. Yana just finished a fully funded MPH at Brown, and Yana did an MA at Bard CEU and now works for the UN, like anti-nuclear something in Vienna. They're extraordinary young women. So 2 of them graduated, 1 just graduated, and 1 transferred to UT Austin on a full ride. They're doing great. Our scholar, Dr. Kulapayeva, is still at Stetson as a professor of practice of journalism. There were many issues with the initiative, but Stetson, I think, can be very proud of the contributions that they made to these young people's lives. Second, I've been rethinking how we teach the region, and this is not just me, this is a lot of scholars of Eastern Europe, Russia, the Soviet Union, and Ukraine. The war has forced us to rethink our field, right? For decades, we called our field Russian studies, right? It used to be Stetson's program in Russian studies, which treats Russia as the center and everything else is like the background. Even when we renamed our program Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies, Russia's the only country there, right? Everything else is just a region. So since 2022, many of us have had to ask, what does it mean to teach the region differently? Can we do it? Right? Can we kind of make Russia just one more country? Can we decenter Russia? What does that look like? What would it mean to stop treating Ukraine as secondary to Moscow, right? And these are really big questions, and they require conversations, changing syllabi, changing how we teach our everyday courses. So I spent a lot of time reshaping how I teach. And working with colleagues in Ukraine, you can see here, we had a conference in 2023 on basically sort of rethinking how we teach this region. And actually, we've been doing a lot of translation of sources, right, to enable professors to kind of add different aspects to their work. My research has also completely changed. I spent about a year giving a lot of Ukraine 101 talks, but the demand for those basically stopped. And so I began to focus on what I actually do, which is study and explain Ukraine. I work on theater, so I could focus on my book project on women in theater, which ends with women in theater and war today, right? So I've been doing a lot of research on what's happening in theater today in Ukraine. You might be surprised that actually there's a ton of theater happening in Ukraine, despite missiles, despite sometimes it happening in bomb shelters. But there's a lot of theater happening in Ukraine. It's really interesting. How they're telling war is really interesting. And so that's what I've been sort of following as a scholar. And you can see me here talking a bit more about some of my kind of more polished ideas about theater. I'm giving a talk at Harvard down on the far right, which is super exciting, at a conference in Columbia and at the University of Kansas. So I sort of, my direction of research actually changed because of what's happening during the war. I was also invited to the first and second ever Ukrainian Shakespeare Festival. In 2024 and 2025 in Ivano-Frankivsk, Ukraine, I went as an observer, and so I have some photos here from that festival. You see the theater on the top left. In the bottom left, I'm looking really funny because we were at this production of Romeo and Juliet that was like all in the dark in like this sort of bomb shelter space, and the actors were like moving around among the audience, and it was like very weird and slightly uncomfortable, but also cool. And then in the middle, we see every city in Ukraine now has sort of an alley of heroes, right? An alley of photos of all the locals who have been killed in the war. And you see me on the bottom right with a really good colleague of mine, Eva Ball, and on the left, my one of my best students from Ukraine, Alexei Polenichka, whom we'll hear more about in a second. So there is theater in Ukraine. There are Shakespeare festivals in Ukraine. Sometimes they have to stop because of sirens and air raid alerts, right? But it is happening there. There is life happening. I finally actually translated my first book into Ukrainian. I didn't personally translate it, but I had it translated into Ukrainian and presented it last year at the annual book fair in Kiev. So you see me there presenting it. I presented it in Lviv as well. And you see two of my friends holding it on the right. And this was actually a really interesting experience. It was my first time in Kiev in 4 years. I was very scared. And you have these apps on your phone that tell you, when an alert is coming, what kind of missile is coming, do you go to the shelter, do you not? And I took it very seriously. And so actually right after that picture was taken, the air raid alert went off. And I said, okay, so we're going to the shelter now because, missiles. And all the Ukrainians were like, no, no, no. I mean, you look at the app, like it's not actually coming directly towards us probably. So like, we're just going to stand outside and like get another drink, like hang out. Like the weather's so pretty. And I was like, no, but air raid, alert, missiles, like, should we not go? And they were like, okay, right. Yeah, you're American. You can go, but we're not going to go. Right. And it was just like, it was a real lesson to me in how people who've lived with war for 4 years get very used to, what is my level of risk, right? And getting to know kind of every sound of air raid alerts and how to read all those apps, which I really could not do. I also got involved in some large scale history of Ukraine projects. These projects probably wouldn't be funded now, but in 2022, they sure would. And contracts are signed and they're happening. So every historian or scholar of Ukraine that is working on one or more of these projects, I promise. So I'm part of a big project called the Ukrainian History Global Initiative, run by a guy named Timothy Snyder. If you're interested in Ukraine, you can follow his Substack. He also has an online podcast of Ukrainian history lectures that are very good. So there's about 70 of us writing different themes about Ukrainian history, and then it'll be available open access online. So you can access it and you can read about anything you want in Ukrainian history when it's done. And we had an annual conference in Kiev, and you can see us there. We're in the basement of the hotel. So in case there's a missile attack, like we can still talk about Ukrainian history. And then what happened was there was an attack, not necessarily in the center of Kiev, but on Kiev region. And you see our little WhatsApp thread where we had this woman who was sort of monitoring us, who was Ukrainian. And so all of us are like, what should we do? Should we go to the shelter? Like, what's happening? And she says, there are drones. You may go if you wish, but we Ukrainians don't find it too dangerous, right? And then she says, but in general, this night, they are saying there is a probability of an attack. So we were like, yes, should we not all now go to the shelter? And in the shelter was all the foreigners, right? Because we were totally freaked out. And then some Ukrainians from Eastern Ukraine who are so used to going to a shelter every night, but never going to a shelter in a really nice hotel that had like cushy little mats to sleep on. So they were like, this is amazing. I'm just like enjoying, I'm going to get a good night's sleep for the first time in a long time. So again, kind of a lesson in how privileged I am and how privileged we are and how much they've been going through. There's also the Oxford Handbook of Ukrainian History, which is a different project. And then I'm writing with my friend Sophia, whom you see there. We've just crossed the border on the bottom right into Ukraine, a concise history of Ukraine for Cambridge University Press. You can look for it in 2028 or 2029. It'll be about 250 pages, Ukrainian history from the beginning of time until now. And we're both actually on research leave next year to finish, hopefully, this book project. So which is all to say that the war in Ukraine has really overturned my professional life, right? From some of the projects that I was doing to really taking on these larger history projects. But more importantly, the education front to me means not only teaching about Ukraine, but in Ukraine. I used to teach in Ukraine a lot in summer schools throughout Ukraine, but in my Fulbright year, I was affiliated with the theater studies program at Ivano-Franko National University of Lviv under a colleague, pictured here, Maya Harbuzyuk. So I taught a course as part of my Fulbright. That's cool. COVID ended the Fulbright and the teaching, but my colleague Maya said, we're all teaching online during COVID anyways. Could you not continue teaching this course? She's one of those people you can't say no to. So before I know it, I'm like teaching online to students in Lviv. And of course, that became much more intense after the full-scale invasion. I really started doing this in spring semester 2022. Here's my student Alexei right here. Here's students Sophia and Yana who left Ukraine after the full-scale invasion. One is in Poland and one is in Czechia. And I've been doing this since then. So I just put here a lot of pictures of my super cute students. My student Alexei visited Stetson online to my students at Stetson. Here we are in spring 2023 with 3 students, fall 2023 with amazing students, spring 2023, fall 2024, spring 2025. You see more of my students and some of their presentations. And these are students from last semester and this past spring semester. I just finished. They just did their final presentations and turned in I turned in their grades. So this has been kind of the most important thing that I've been doing, right? It doesn't seem like a lot. I mean, it's an MA program in theater studies. There aren't a ton of people who do that. But it is a direct way of helping Ukraine, and it's a direct way of helping colleagues and a direct way of kind of interacting and building bridges with young people in Ukraine. And I think everything I know about theater in Ukraine comes from my truly, truly amazing students. It's my front. My best student, Alexei, whom you've seen in several of these pictures, joined the Army in fall 2023. Here's a photo of him at the front he sent me with the Ukrainian translation of my book. When I got this photo, I said, okay, all the headaches about this translation, it's worth it if it's giving him something to think about on the front lines. He does drones. And just so you know, there's no specific front line in the war. It's called a kill zone because it is a war that is fought largely in the air now. And so the drone operators are not far from the front lines. They're very close to the front lines and very close to the Russians, and they can really see what they're doing. And a mutual friend of ours said that he's having such a hard time because, I mean, he's a theater kid. You know what I mean? Like, he's not supposed to be in the military. He's a theater kid. And as a drone operator, he's able to see the Russians on the ground that he's supposed to kill. Right. And he's not someone who wants to be killing people, but he does want his country to remain a country. Right. And he told me that the reason he signed up was that he couldn't talk about democracy if he weren't willing to defend it. And I thought about that a lot, many times. Like, what am I willing to do for democracy? What are we all willing to do? Right. And whenever I sort of don't want to go to a protest or, want to sort of avoid what's happening in our own country, I think about Alexei and how he's willing to go to the front lines and really risk his life every single day for democracy, right? For Ukraine to be democratic. Another colleague of mine has 3 children and a husband. And for a long time, her husband wasn't eligible for mobilization because they had 3 kids under 18. If you have 3 kids under 18, like, you are not going to be mobilized. But now one child just turned 18. So her calculations are changing, right? Because her son could get mobilized and her husband could also get mobilized, right? At the same time, she wants to support the war. So that means really difficult family conversations and the difficulty of planning a future when the war has gone on for that long, that your children who were kind of quote unquote safe are now eligible to fight. And in case you didn't know, there's no functioning decommissioning in Ukraine. Once you enter the war, it's very hard to leave. Once you enter the military, they've been unable to craft a policy for leaving the military. So once a person goes to war, you can't leave until the war's over or until you've been wounded or killed in action. And so this is what I mean by everyday war. It's not just about the missile strike, it's the family conversation. It's the university schedule. Our semesters are very different in the universities there because they don't want students to be going to campus when it's cold. So there's sort of this like shortened semester because of predicted infrastructure attacks. It's about power outages. It's about the message you're afraid to receive, as I was in March when Lviv is bombed, and you know the building and the pictures you see is next to the theater department. My colleagues were all okay. It's about a child turning 18. It's about a colleague who keeps working past exhaustion because stopping feels impossible. So what does it mean to care, right? And this is sort of like a picture of my life in Ukraine. We see the air raid alert kind of app things from my phone. This is me looking really annoyed at the line going into Poland from Ukraine, which people do every day because you can't obviously fly into Ukraine. You have to take the train or walk. But amazing tea on Ukrainian railways. And my beautiful student Yulia here, whom I got to see when I was in Kiev, and there was a air raid alert over the entire country. And in the bottom right, you see at a different university, not the one I teach at, but at a university in Lviv, and every university has them a wall of heroes, right? The wall of all the students who have fought in the war and have been killed in action, right? This is Ukraine. And what does it mean to care about Ukraine? And I used to think of care as feeling, like feeling compassion, feeling concern, feeling sadness, feeling outrage, feeling crying. But after 4 years, I think care has to become a practice. Care is attention over time. Care is refusing to let people disappear when the headlines move on. Care is learning enough to ask better questions. Care is supporting Ukraine materially and politically. Care is writing elected officials. I think Ashley Moody is going to delete me from her contacts if I ever write her again. Care is supporting institutions. Care is reading Ukrainian voices, as you have all done today. Care is inviting Ukrainian speakers or speakers of Ukraine, as you have done today, and resisting the temptation to turn a war of aggression into a vague tragedy. But care also has limits. And this has been harder for me to learn, and probably all of us are struggling this in the care that we feel towards our own country. Care cannot mean destroying yourself. It cannot mean saying yes to every talk, every request, every crisis, every late night email. I've had to learn that sustained care requires strict boundaries. Otherwise, care becomes another form of exhaustion. I came here in 2022 to talk about a crisis. I come back in 2026 to talk about a long war, but also about long relationships. Ukraine is not only a battlefield, it's students logging into class, sometimes from their phones, colleagues keeping universities alive, artists making meaning and gifts on Etsy, parents recalculating the future, soldiers like Oleksiy carrying books to the front, and people trying to remain human under conditions designed to make that actually impossible. In fact, just one note, because I know you have a Shakespeare group. A colleague of mine who organized that Shakespeare festival, she was asked by a reporter, why Shakespeare? And she said, war is fundamentally about making you inhuman. And Shakespeare is, for me, a pathway to remember what it is to be human. And by reading Shakespeare and by performing Shakespeare, maybe we can hold on to our humanity. So to care about Ukraine is not only to ask, when will the war end? It's to ask, how do we remain present? How do we keep listening? How do we help people live, study, teach, create, and return? And that kind of care is slower than outrage. It's less dramatic than hope. But it may be, and I think it is, what true solidarity requires. And I just put here some pictures to show you how totally beautiful Ukraine is. That middle picture is my favorite park in Lviv. On the left is St. Sophia's Cathedral that's been there since the year 1040 in Kyiv. That's the beautiful Dnipro River near Kaniv, and that's again that beach that I will never see again. Thank you very, very much for listening, for your attention, and for your care. How do I turn it off? Thank you.